The trading day. Romaine Bostic alongside Scarlett Fu. We're counting you down to the closing bell, and here to help take us beyond the bell. It's a global simulcast with Tim Stenovic and Carol Masser. Welcome to our audiences across all of our Bloomberg platforms. Carol, you look vexed. What are you looking at?
I don't know. I'm just kind of looking for something to talk about because...
Oh, wow. I appreciate the honesty, Carol. I like that.
Carol Masser.
It's like, once again, right? We have this day where...
I mean, these two-day work weeks are tough, right?
It's a little tough getting back in the groove. No, but I think it's just an interesting trade where we did see a rally. We really kind of fizzled. You do see rates kind of holding on to some of their highs of the session. I just think, you know, we got to just kind of wait to see what we get in terms of the Fed's next move and direction and kind of guidance, if you will. And that's a long way, what, a month away or so?
It is, and a lot can happen between now and a month. We have, you know, another employment report that we hear about. We have more inflation reports, but I'm still obsessed with today's trade and the way that the S&P 500 was up as much as 1.3% earlier in the session. The NASDAQ was up more than 1.6 earlier in the session, and we're looking at a day that's going to close pretty much, you know, fractionally higher, perhaps, or even lower if it moves lower in the next few minutes.
I like what our last guest just said, which is that people that she talks to, her clients, no one's obsessed with recession anymore. I mean, Romaine, you, Carol, and I are, but their clients are no longer obsessed with that. It's more about looking ahead and making sure that they, you know, catch up to the gains that they might have missed out on.
Yeah, I mean, and, you know, look, you get to a point, too, where we should point out that there are some seasonality effects going on right now, particularly when it comes to volume in the middle of August, where a lot of folks, of course, are away from the desk, and you don't have as many catalysts. I mean, earnings season is wrapping up, and as we pointed out, it's still a ways away until we get that next Fed decision. So you hang your hat on the economic data that we got this morning. There's certainly some positives in there, and maybe that was a catalyst for the rally that we saw to start the day. That rally, unfortunately, did not hold up, at least not to the extent we thought it would. The Dow Jones Industrial Average is going to stay in the green, but only by about 0.1%. The S&P 500 only in the green by 1 point here on the day, while the NASDAQ Composite also in the green, but only by about 0.1%. The Russell 2000, which had a pretty good run earlier in the day, is going to close in the red, down 0.4%.
Yeah, I got to say, I'm thinking of what Aaron Kennan over at Clear Harbor said to us, and he's like, if you think we're going into a recession, you got to keep in mind that the S&P multiple tends to bottom around 14, and right now we've got, what, an S&P that's at 20, and so if you think that that's the scenario, then we're going to have to see some kind of market correction. But again, as you said, Scarlett, like, there's less recession worries at this point.
Less recession worries. We have modest gains for the day, but when you look at the industry group performances, the gains, at least among industry groups, are capped. 0.6% for consumer services, and that's really your hotel companies, your casinos, so Wynn Resorts leading the way there. Media entertainment, that's Disney, lifting that group up by 0.5%. On the flip side, you look at the biggest losers, off by 1.6%. Consumer durable and apparel, that's Tapestry, following its gigantic purchase of Capri.
Exactly, which kind of sets me up really nicely for my individual gainers. So thank you for that, Scarlett.
Sure.
Let's go. You're welcome. Or thank you. All right, so let's go to the individual gainers. Capri is obviously on that list. Up 55% in this session. I think we're up almost 60% at its highs. We know the news. Tapestry is buying Capri, $8.5 billion deal. Capri, owner of Jimmy Choo, but Michael Kors is really the bulk of the industry. We were talking with our BI and BN reporters on this, and really Michael Kors is the core business, no pun intended there. And there's some work to be done there, and it might be a 2-year strategy play here for Tapestry, so investors might need to be a little bit patient. Disney, number 1 in the S&P 500. We broke their earnings last night. Stock was down, then it turned around on that analyst call, so it really did bounce around a bunch, but ending the day up almost 5%. Company talked about capital spending and outlays for movies and TVs coming in lower than projected. Some of those savings due as a result of some of the strikes in Hollywood right now. So anyway, and we should point out fiscal third quarter profit did beat, revenue did miss, but definitely a standout in today's session. And AppLovin, ticker is APP, it's up 26% here at the close. Mobile gaming company, we're talking about a $12.8 billion market cap to its highest in a year. The company reported second quarter results, beat expectations. They also gave an outlook that is seen strong by analysts. The stock is up around 250% year to date, about 8% of the float is shorted, but man, quite some outperformance there.
Well, we got quite some underperformance as well. Some notable decliners today do include Tapestry, finishing the day down 16%, having its worst day since March of 2020. We all know the story. We've been talking about it all day. This is how investors are reacting to it. Let's talk about what happened in the auto sector today, because General Motors and Ford both taking a hit. GM down 5.8%, Ford down 4.5%, as a result of investors being concerned about potential labor strikes, the effect that those could have on the companies. Bloomberg did report yesterday that new contract demands made by the UAW could cost more than $80 billion, add $80 billion, I should say, to each of the biggest U.S. automakers, just their labor costs. So this is how investors reacted today. And then Krispy Kreme, fair to say this is one of my favorite tickers, DNUT, down 14% today, 13.7%.
It's one of your favorite
What
foods.
is that, D-nuts?
Yeah, D-nut. Yeah, it's like down.
Do you get it?
Yeah, it's a donut.
D-nuts.
It's a donut.
No, it's a donut.
Having its worst day since it went public back in 2021. Net revenue, adjusted EBITDA, trailed consensus estimates. EBITDA margins contracted. They did also say that results here in the U.S. were marred by as a result of an issue with a third-party point of sale system. But I just think people aren't eating as many donuts as.
Did you see their profitability?
Yeah, it contracted.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you know how much it was, Tim?
No, I don't. It's not
$233,000.
small.
No, depends.
Yeah.
For a donut company, I guess that's big. I don't know. Are there any?
Is that per
publicly traded
donut, Romaine?
I don't know.
Dunkin' Donuts.
Is that per
Don't
donut?
listen to me. I know what I'm talking about. Let's just check in on the yield space here, because, guys, this is important because we spent so much time talking about these big auctions that were coming this week. You had that 3-year auction on Tuesday, actually went well. A 10-year auction on Wednesday, it actually went well. 30-year auction, not so much here. In fact, a real sign of weak demand there on the longer end of the curve here, showing that people are a little bit concerned about going too far out on duration here. And then you saw, of course, a big change in yields on the basis of that. 9 basis points higher on your 30-year yield. Similar move on the 20-year yield, as well as the 10-year yield, as well as a 5-year yield. So this has now gone from being a short duration story in terms of the moves and the volatility that we're seeing in the bond market to much more on the longer end. And you wonder what the setup means when it comes to what the Fed does next. If this is a bet that the Fed is not done, if this is a bet that economic conditions are deteriorating, then I guess not only are you going to get a repricing in the Treasury market, but maybe potentially in the equity market as well.
Right, which goes back to kind of what Aaron Kennan said to us too. If you believe there's going to be some kind of recession, then this PE on the S&P 500 just doesn't make sense, Scarlett.
It doesn't make sense. I just want to jump in here because Capri Holdings, of course, the target of Tapestry's M&A. This is the company, as you were saying, Carol, really Michael Kors, has reported earnings. And first quarter earnings per share of 41 cents, a big drop off from a year ago, which was $1.40. Revenue in the period was $1.23 billion, slightly higher than what analysts had anticipated, which was $1.2 billion. And adjusted EPS did beat the consensus by about 3 cents. The big question, of course, is for Tapestry because it's shelling out $8.5 billion in cash, which means it's taking on debt. And Moody's has placed the stock on review, or I should say the company on review for a possible downgrade.
This is like such a turnaround story. I mean, you talk about, what was it? You're talking about double-digit declines in the Michael Kors brand in terms of sales. I think Versace was down 5 or 6%. Jimmy Choo was the only thing that held up here. And I guess, it raises a lot of questions as to what Tapestry is buying and more importantly, can they actually revive brands that are well known but certainly have lost their cachet.
I also wonder about the so-called synergies that they're saying they're going to have, which essentially just means job cuts, right? $200 million of
Is that where you were the last 6 months? You were just like in the MBA school or something?
I didn't hear what you said.
The only thing that they would say is, when we were talking with the analysts, is that Tapestry, you think about the Coach brand, they were having some problems for a while, and they've really reinvented them. They're still having some problems, at least according to our team here that we talked to with the Stuart Weitzman brand. But if they can somehow take Michael Kors, which has become a little bit saturated in terms of the marketplace, if they can do something to revive it. And I agree with you, Romaine, that Jimmy Choo, I feel like, had a lot more cachet a few years ago.
During the Sex and the City days.
That's when I bought my first.
Yeah. Well, I think part of it also is that Jimmy Choo and Versace gives them an entree into Europe, and that allows the new Tapestry to better compete against LVMH and Kering and Richemont and all the other European luxury brands.
Do you know how many brands LVMH has? We were having this conversation earlier about whether this was even a fair comparison. I didn't know that, 75.
Yeah, it's incredible.
Yeah.
75.
See, I don't think
75.
it's a fair comparison.
Yeah, and
either.
you're talking what I guess the Capri
Tiffany,
tapestry kind
yeah.
tie up is like basically a dozen at most, and even like Kering isn't really that as many, I should say, as LVMH.
I just want to know, do any of you wear manprees?
What? I don't even know what that is.
You know what it is? Didn't you talk about this?
It was on air a couple weeks ago. Apparently, it's like
Sounds
the new
dirty.
thing.
No,
The new
it's
thing
like
to wear to the beach.
Man-prees?
The new thing to wear to the
manprees.
beach.
Guys are wearing manprees.
Guys are not.
the new
wearing
thing.
manprees.
Come
No
on,
guy.
you're
These
among-
guys
remain
are
among
not wearing
friends.
manprees. How's that? These guys are not.
All right. From Capri to
Gosh,
manpree.
you travel in a different world than me,
I
girl,
guess we
master.
all do.
That's how things work out in Jersey.
Sorry. All right, we got to run. Guys, that's a wrap. Our cross-platform coverage, radio,
a new one.
TV, YouTube. Check them out. You might like. And, of course, on Bloomberg Originals. We call it Beyond the Bell. We'll see you tomorrow, everybody.
We're going to have to ask.
Changing the weather, changing the weather. Something's happening here. Changing the weather,
All right.
changing the
I have a feeling that, and I feel like we are going to be increasingly talking about what's going on in the weather. And I feel like just in the last week or so alone that we've talked about it a lot, rightfully so. I think back 10, 15 years ago when you'd bring up climate change and people would send me hate mail. But it's a thing, guys, and just check it out in terms of what's going on. Just look at what's going on in Maui specifically.
Yeah, as Bloomberg opinion editor Mark Gongloff writes, as of this writing, we still don't know exactly what sparked Maui's fires. They have already taken 36 lives, raised much of historic Lahaina, and forced desperate survivors to jump into the ocean to escape the flames. It's another horrific and devastating reminder of this summer of 2023 that is turning out to be like no other.
Dun, dun, dun. Sorry. Mark, though, is Bloomberg opinion editor and columnist covering climate change, a former managing editor of Fortune.com, ran HuffPost business and tech coverage, was a reporter and editor for someplace I worked for, the Wall Street Journal. He's here in our Bloomberg Interactive Broker studio. Mark, I was talking about, first of all, thank you.
Sure.
When we said we want to do something, Tim's like, we got to talk to Mark. Talking with our producer, Paul Brennan, I said, did you look at Mark's columns? Corals are dying. Losing them would be dire. Extreme heat will make your air travel even worse. Storms don't have to be this catastrophic. Heat dome shows there are no climate havens. That's just what in the last few months.
I know, it's a depressing beat. I picked a rough year to start really covering this full time.
But it's an important one.
Yes.
So scooch it a little bit closer because we want to make sure
Okay.
we can hear you.
Okay.
And how are you thinking about this season specifically?
This season is, right now, it's the hottest it's ever been, the highest temperatures on the planet. It's the hottest July we've ever had, the hottest month we've ever had. Oceans are the hottest they've ever been. And we're seeing records broken. Phoenix just had 31 straight days above 110
I have
degrees.
family in Phoenix. They've talked about it.
Yeah, it's really rough. And all of this could just be a precursor to what's to come if we don't really get a hold of the climate problem, because this is an El Nino year, which is a crazy weather pattern that can make temperatures really high and do all kinds of crazy things to the weather. And that can be temporary. But this year is going to probably be the hottest year in human history, or maybe even the hottest year in 125,000 years. It doesn't have to be the future that we're doomed to, because we can still do things. I mean, I write a lot of doom and gloom. I soak in doom and gloom all the time, but I do want to try to get across this message that we're not doomed. There are things that we can do.
So talk to us about some of those things, because we spoke to Eric Roston last week,
Yeah.
and our colleague here at Bloomberg, who covers climate change, who covers the environment. And he said we could look back in 30 years, and this could be considered a cool, cold summer.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
scary.
It is. I mean, I've heard the phrase, there's a Simpsons meme going around where Bart says this is the hottest July ever, and Homer says it's the hottest July so far, and really, unfortunately, that could be true. I mean, we are on pace for a lot of warming, and that can make the climate very chaotic. 1.5 degrees of warming is the peak, the maximum that we're trying to hit under the Paris Climate Accords, okay? So that's like the best case scenario we're looking at by, like, say, 2050 or by the end of the century. A lot of people think we're not even close to that. And in fact, when we talk about solutions, we passed a giant climate bill last year. There's a lot of big things going on, but it's still not enough.
Listen, and I love talking about the solutions, and I see more EVs on the road than I've ever seen before, and I do feel like people are thinking about it. I think about it a lot in terms of our world. I think the investment world is starting to wake up to it in a real way because they kind of have to. But having said that, I do think it is, I don't want to be inflammatory, but it is important for us to understand that a 1% or 1.5%, this is going to change some things potentially forever.
For sure. I mean, you look at, we've had about 1.2%, and we're talking, or 1.2 degrees, sorry, 1.2 degrees Celsius of warming so far
Right.
over pre-industrial averages, which doesn't sound like anything. The difference between, if we were talking Fahrenheit, 78 and 81, to us going outside, we wouldn't notice that difference. But if you're talking about as a global average over a long period of time, it does have enormous impacts. The heat waves that we're seeing right now in Phoenix, Phoenix has always been hot, but it's never been this hot before, as long as humans, as long as we've been keeping records. The oceans get hot, corals bleach, that sort of thing happens, but we've never seen them like boil alive like they're doing in Florida this summer. And all of that has been made possible by just that tiny little bit of global warming that we've seen. So it is really important to do everything we can to limit that.
I just want to say one thing, because
Yeah.
Anna Wong was on TV earlier, follows the economy here, and was talking about inflation, and she said, hey, one of the things we need to think about is climate change and the impact it's going to have on food prices going forward. We've seen it already, but continuing, and I think this is serious stuff, Tim.
Yeah, it is. And Mark, you bring me to my next question, which is about a global solution rather than just focusing on a solution here in the U.S. And I don't even want to focus on the U.S. We're politicians. It's so dysfunctional between Democrats and Republicans that we can't even get, two parties to agree to the right, identifying the problem, in fact, which is totally dysfunctional. But at the same time, Carol can talk about electric cars for as much as she wants and solar for as much as she wants. But if China, if India, if Indonesia, if Vietnam are, countries that are just spewing, emissions from fossil fuels into the air, then does that even matter?
For sure. I mean, right now, the U.S. over history has emitted the most carbon of any other nation, but China is catching up really fast, and they've been the primary emitter for the past several years. One of the important things that we need to do, and this is a hard thing to do because we've got a lot of money to spend here at home, but we need to try to help these developing countries develop in a sustainable way. We need to one of the things that the climate bill did last year is sort of start to develop a green energy economy here in the U.S. We need to expand on that, and we need to start exporting that knowledge and that know-how to these other countries to help them develop sustainably.
Can you imagine a Democrat or Republican politician going into West Virginia and giving that message? Like, the U.S. needs to help other countries become more have more sustainable energy?
That is the Gordian knot of this problem right now, is it's very hard to get through our politics. We're not emitting the most right now, but we do have a big influence over the rest of the world, and we're capable of spending a lot of money.
Yeah.
And we have to somehow square that circle. And I guess when you see smoke coming in from Canada and it's clouding Chicago, for everything from Chicago to New York,
Right.
and eventually I hope that the message kind of gets through and can get around whatever political obstacles we have. It hasn't quite yet. At the very least, people don't really deny that climate change is happening anymore, but there's a whole other thing we have to get to.
Help me, though. I always feel like, follow the money, or Wall Street and investors will follow the money. Are we seeing investor interest rise? I feel like ESG was not the way to do it. So I'm curious about that. Certainly as infrastructure money comes in, that kind of gets everybody's attention. But do you feel like there's the financial community saying, I don't know, they want to get more involved, or
Yeah.
be more involved, or can be more constructive here?
For sure. I think I just saw today that BlackRock had raised a
I
big
saw
fund.
that. Yeah.
It's big, it's billions of dollars in terms of it's a drop in the ocean compared to the money that we need. But it is a start, and it's a sign. BlackRock is raising this money at a time when there's been a huge wave of anti-ESG rhetoric, and they've been all hit with that. But rather than backing away from that, maybe they're not going to call it ESG anymore, but they're still raising funds for green energy because there is a lot of money. The last climate bill allocated $369 billion in credits, and people see people see that this is affecting business. It's affecting the way they do business and their cost of business. And so Wall Street is getting this message.
One of your stories was $200 trillion. $200 trillion to stop global warming is a bargain. What's that $200 trillion number?
Well, the $200 trillion is spread out over a very long time. Maybe I shouldn't have mentioned that number, but that was a number that I think BNEF here, Bloomberg NEF, mentioned, and I thought it was a striking number. It's a huge number. But if you think about the billions and trillions that we lose to wildfires, droughts, floods, lost agriculture, we're losing so much economic power. The global economy and the U.S. economy will be trillions per year smaller as a result of climate change if we don't get a handle on it. And so it's really an investment, but it's very difficult. When you hear the numbers like 200 trillion, everybody wants to run away, but it's really an investment, and we have to sort of change that paradigm, the way we talk about it.
Sorry, Tim.
I know, I had a lot of questions. I told you Mark was great. We got to get you back, Mark Gonglov. Hey, check out his most recent columns, because he's got a great one on how extreme heat is going to make your air travel even worse, and then also about insurance, which we didn't talk about, which is so important. Mark Gonglov.
Come back every week.
He's a Bloomberg opinion editor. He joins us here in the Interactive Brokers studio. You're listening and watching Bloomberg Business Week on Bloomberg Radio.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, on Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
It's 4:21 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. Among the names reporting after the close of trading, News Corp, and it is out with revenue for the fourth quarter that missed the average analyst estimate. News Corp's fourth quarter revenue came in at $2.43 billion. The estimates for News Corp were for $2.49 billion. Stocks did end the session higher today. Stocks churned with the S&P up 1 point, little change there. Stocks really did struggle for direction amid bets that even if the Fed pauses its rate hikes in September, policy will remain tight to prevent a flare-up in inflation. The Dow held on to a 52-point gain, up by about 0.1%. NASDAQ, the composite index, up 16 points, a gain today of 0.1%. 10-year yield 4.09%, with the 2-year at 4.83%. Gold down $1.18 the ounce to $19.13, down by about 0.1%. And West Texas Intermediate crude down 1.8%, $82.86 a barrel. After earnings, the Walt Disney Company rallied today by 4.9%. Again, recapping, stocks higher, little changed. S&P up by 1 point. I'm Charlie Pellet. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie. Thank you so much. Charlie Pellet there with a Bloomberg Business News Flash. Carol Masser along with Tim Stenovic live on Bloomberg Business Week here in our studio at Bloomberg headquarters, of course, on Bloomberg Originals, our streaming service, and on YouTube. So, Tim, got to say, went straight to the CDC website for the stats on this and found each year approximately 30,000 cases of Lyme disease are reported to the CDC by state health departments and the District of Columbia. However, this number doesn't reflect every case, and I guess they say it could be, if you use different estimates and methodology, I'll get it out, it could be as much as almost 500,000 people may get Lyme disease every year in the U.S.
Because the other issue, and we're going to talk about this for the next 10 minutes.
Yeah.
The other issue is that these cases don't necessarily all present symptoms in the same way.
Exactly.
There's no clear definition coming from medical professionals.
All right, so let's get to it. Nicole Baumgarth is with us, professor of molecular microbiology and immunology at the Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health, which, as you know, supported by Michael R. Bloomberg, founder of Bloomberg LP and Bloomberg Philanthropies. Nicole joining us on Zoom in Baltimore. Nicole, nice to have you here with us. Lyme disease summer, I think about it. I'm up in, if you're up in Connecticut or out in the woods, you know that this is something you need to think about it. Tell us, though, from your perspective, how bad really, I can talk about cases, but how bad is it? And as Tim said, it's not necessarily the same thing for everyone. And what does bad mean in terms of the impact it has on individuals?
Yes, thank you for having me and for this topic. I think you're raising a very important point, which is that in most cases, individuals who get bitten by a tick and develop Lyme disease will go to their GP and get the necessary antibiotics and will recover fully. But a small subset of patients do not, and that could be because maybe their diagnosis was delayed. They may not have known that they had a tick bite. Or because of some genetic predisposition that we don't really fully understand, and they develop disease that can be very debilitating. It can lead to long-term consequences. So people talk about having brain fog, not being able to concentrate, developing neurological symptoms, and unable to function. And that really is life-changing for these individuals.
Professor, I've talked to people who have had Lyme disease, and they tell me the resistance that they came up against in their diagnosis from the medical community about being diagnosed. And I'm wondering if you can speak to that at all, and if that's changed in recent years as we become more aware of it and more aware of the symptoms.
Yeah, I think it has changed. I mean, I think where the resistance was never to, you appear at your GP's office and say you've seen a tick or you've been out in the woods and now you display these symptoms. You may even have that very distinct bullseye rush. GPs would immediately come to the conclusion that in all likelihood you have Lyme disease. It's really those protracted cases where you have these very non-specific symptoms of feeling tired and having this brain fog and having pains and aches that are really hard to pinpoint, so very non-specific. and then not having this history of having been out in the woods, not being able to make this connection where people really are resistant. And if the diagnosis is protracted, you may have been out in the woods, but you don't recall, which is now weeks and months ago, and many of us go hiking frequently. So that is really where the non-specific nature of the symptoms, and we don't really have a really good diagnostic. And some of the patients that are being diagnosed don't come up with a positive diagnosis.
There's no test, or the test just, forgive me, but I don't know much about this. There's no test, or the test doesn't show, the test isn't conclusive.
So when there is a test, and it's actually 2 tests, and you have to be positive in both tests in order to be qualified by CDC criteria of having Lyme disease. The problem comes when only one of the tests shows up positive, or the test doesn't show exactly, isn't positive for all the criteria. So it's not a very simple yes/no test like we're used to, like with the COVID test. It's a little more complicated. And so that is when the problem comes in. And that, again, goes back to patients maybe having had the infection but a long time ago, and so it's not so clear to diagnose them using this test. So a positive test is always clear, but when the test is negative, you don't know whether it's really means you haven't had Lyme disease.
Hey, one thing I'm curious, whether it's Lyme disease or something else, Nicole, are you thinking more and more about just the world's getting really populated and we are increasingly pushing animals out of their normal domains and just living closer and closer to them? Is this just kind of part of the problems, whether it's Lyme disease or other illnesses, if you will?
It clearly has to do with, climate change. Ticks are on the move. They're moving because it's warmer now, and areas they can move into areas that they previously didn't find hospitable for them. And it is what you said, this sort of us getting out there in areas that we previously weren't out. And so we are really getting into the life cycle that has been evolutionarily established over a very long period of time, and we are sort of interrupting them as much as they're interrupting us.
When I was preparing for this, there's actually a map on the CDC website that shows Lyme disease cases over time by different states, and you can start at 20 years ago, back in 2001, and see the way that it's migrated. It's pretty remarkable, and not in a good way. So, Professor, I'm wondering about a vaccine here, because my understanding is that Pfizer's working on something and it's been delayed, but it's in stage 3 trials right now. What can you tell us about a vaccine for Lyme disease?
I think it's absolutely doable. As I heard the banter before I came on, yes, we are giving it to our pets, right? Dogs can get a Lyme vaccine, horses can get a Lyme vaccine. And so I think it's absolutely doable to develop one. I'm very excited about the clinical trial. It has been delayed. There have been some problems. So I hope it will go forward and give us good results. The challenge with any vaccine is that because, we're getting now into the colder months, so the number of Lyme disease cases is going down. This is obviously a challenge for a vaccine to show efficacy, which is really, can we reduce the number of cases of Lyme disease in the population that got vaccinated? So it's a measure of how many people do we vaccinate, right? And then how many of them would normally get Lyme disease. So it's not a straightforward clinical trial, but I'm very hopeful that it will show hopefully efficacy.
Because I have a really silly question, because I do think about my dogs. Flea and tick, and there's medicine we give. There used to be some chemicals on the back, and now it's a pill that's got like all these different things. I mean, if we could do it with pets, why has it kind of taken so long for us to maybe do something for humans? And if it's not safe for my pet, maybe I don't want to be giving it to my pet.
I mean, we don't want to go into order, but I mean, there was a vaccine on the market, of course, over 20 years ago that was taken off the market, but it wasn't taken off the market because of low efficacy. There was an idea that it may cause side effects that we didn't want.
But were those? My understanding is those were unfounded, and it came at a time where there was a lot of skepticism about vaccines.
Absolutely correct. Yes, it turned out to be unfounded, but I think once you have that doubt that something may be done, you don't want to give something that's supposed to prevent a disease and cause a disease, right? So to err on the side of caution, I think, and really, yeah, to not have the headaches of people going after you for trying to give a vaccine. I think people, the company pulled it off the market, which I think overall is unfortunate, right?
Right.
We are seeing the rise in cases. We need to really develop a vaccine.
We have 30 seconds left. Just give us 3 tips on how to stay safe from ticks for the remainder of the summer.
Yes, wear long-sleeved pants and shirts, and be a goof and put your trousers into your socks. And
That's how I roll anyway.
It does.
Check yourself after you arrive home for ticks and your loved ones as well, and maybe have a shower because some ticks you can, before they're fully attached, you might be able to shower them away.
We feel like
I hate those little guys.
We feel like little monkeys at home because we're always checking each other.
Yeah, you got to do that.
And gosh, I've spent hours pulling ticks from my dog. Nicole Baumgart, she is molecular microbiology and immunology professor at Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health. Thank you so much for joining us.
All right, well, let's get a check on the latest world and national news. Nancy Lyons is in the Bloomberg 99 newsroom in Washington, D.C. Hey, Nance.
Thanks, Tim. The Justice Department has offered its timeline for when it wants to start Donald Trump's trial on election charges. Special counsel Jack Smith is proposing it begin on January 2nd, 2024. Now the clock is ticking on the Trump team to offer its request. U.S. District Judge Tanya Chutkan has promised to set a trial date at an August 28th hearing. Well, it's another not guilty plea in the classified documents case against former President Trump. Bloomberg's Nathan Hager has more from Washington.
The former president's personal aide, Walt Nauta, appeared before a federal magistrate judge in Fort Pierce, Florida, to answer to an expanded indictment that came out last month. The new charges include conspiracy to obstruct government efforts to retrieve classified materials. Former President Trump already gave his not guilty plea in writing. He didn't attend today's arraignment in person. A third suspect, Mar-a-Lago property manager Carlos de Oliveira, couldn't enter his plea once again. He's still looking for a Florida-based lawyer to represent him. In Washington, I'm Nathan Hager, Bloomberg Radio.
It's still unclear if former President Trump will be taking part in the first primary debate that's set for August 23rd. He spoke to Newsmax late yesterday and said he has a problem with the loyalty pledge that the Republican National Committee is requiring for any candidate to take part.
I wouldn't sign the pledge. Why would I sign a pledge? There are people on there that I wouldn't have. I wouldn't have certain people as, somebody that I'd endorse.
Some of Trump's aides are looking at alternative options if Trump does not participate in the debate. Iran has transferred 5 Iranian Americans from prison to house arrest in exchange for billions of dollars in Iranian assets that had been frozen in South Korea. U.S. officials say Switzerland helped negotiate the deal. Global news 24 hours a day, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in over 120 countries. I'm Nancy Lyons.
markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, on Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
It's 4:40 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. A revenue miss at News Corp. News Corp reported fourth quarter revenue of $2.43 billion. Estimates for News Corp were for $2.49 billion. Stocks struggled for direction today amid bets that even if the Fed pauses its rate hikes in September, policy will remain tight to prevent a flare-up in inflation. S&P ended the day little changed, up 1 point, up less than 0.1%. The Dow up 52, a gain of 0.2%. NASDAQ, the composite index, higher today by 16 points, up by 0.1%. 10-year yield 4.10% with a 2-year that's yielding 4.85%. Gold down $1.50 the ounce to $19.12, a drop of less than 0.1%, while West Texas Intermediate crude down 1.8%, $82.88 for a barrel of WTI. Wall Street's risk on bid also faded as Federal Reserve Bank of San Francisco President Mary Daly told Yahoo Finance that the central bank, quote, still has more work to do. Well, as for the overall market backdrop, Aaron Kennan is CEO at Clear Harbor Asset Management, and he was a guest right here on Bloomberg Business Week.
The reality is that many companies have, or most of the companies have beaten expectations, but when you look at year-over-year earnings growth, not much has changed. And so those expectations have been exceeded, which is something that we all welcome. But markets haven't reacted, dramatically as a whole to the earnings cycle.
Disney earnings today sent the stock up by 4.9%. Again, recapping, the Dow, the S&P, and NASDAQ did finish higher. Little changed on the S&P, up today by 1 point. I'm Charlie Pellet. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
It is indeed. All right, Charlie, thank you so much. Charlie Pellet there. All right, folks, we wanted to bring back this guest because she got shortchanged yesterday.
Thanks, Disney Plus.
Exactly. It was it's not a sleepy summer week. No. All right, so I got to say, I think her timing, though, and having her back today is maybe even better, considering the CPI data we got this morning that showed that inflation was held down in part last month by declining airfare prices.
Oh, look, she knew this was coming because the company she works for, she's lead economist at the travel app Hopper, they had a report earlier this year that said U.S. round-trip tickets came down actually before pre-pandemic levels. So, we're just not feeling it. That's the thing.
Yeah, I know. I'm looking for those deals. Haley Berg is back with us, lead economist at the travel app Hopper, and she joins us on Zoom from Boston. First of all, Haley, thank you so much. We are in the news business and things get a little wacky, but you were so gracious, and we're so glad we were able to get you back here. So it is interesting. We got that CPI print. We did see airline prices coming down. Talk to us about the environment right now and what's going on in terms of pricing.
When we look at the domestic market, a lot of what we're seeing this year is being driven by increased capacity from airlines. We typically see a pretty tight relationship between fares and how many seats are available to book. Right now, we're above 2019 levels. There are more seats available to book on domestic airlines now than there were at this time in 2019. That combined with better jet fuel prices, down significantly from last year, still a ways to go compared to 2019, and demand opening up to international destinations, all has combined and has really added to a seasonal effect. Typically, fares drop at this time of the year, but that's being compounded by this increase in supply, shift in demand, and some relief on costs. And that's how we end up with prices about 10% lower than last year and versus 2019.
So did the international tickets, or are they just like totally exempt from this? We're seeing, since demand is so high, international is continuing to be expensive?
International remains extremely expensive on long-haul routes. Think fares to Asia, well over $1,400, up almost 60%.
That's an economy?
That would be an average, what we call a good deal price. So an economy, basic economy ticket, pretty much anything excluding first or business.
Okay.
All right, so Asia, what about Europe specifically?
Europe was very expensive this summer, peaks over $1,400 a ticket, but we have seen significant improvement in the last couple of weeks. Some of that is seasonal, some of that is supply. Airlines have gotten back to about 97% of 2019 capacity. So we have seen demand shift back international. If it feels like everyone you know is in Italy, it's because they probably are.
You're like the third person. You're like the
are.
third person to say that to me in 24 hours.
You're so, everybody's going.
Like if you open up Instagram, apparently. Yeah. Where's the place to go? Sicily? Is it like because of the White Lotus?
We are definitely seeing some what we call set jetting. So Palermo and Taormina in Sicily are very popular, but then some of the usual suspects. We see the Amalfi Coast, Rome and Milan, Lake Como, very popular this time of year.
So what happens? Does it stay this way, or then once we start to get closer to holidays, we start to see an uptick?
On the domestic front, we have a couple more weeks of these low fares. We're expecting them to bottom out this month, and then they'll start rising in late September, early October, when travelers are starting to plan those trips for Thanksgiving and Christmas. And we'll see them rise back to reach about pre-pandemic levels in December. We'll pretty much match where we were in 2019 and 2022 in December, about $280 a ticket if you're booking something at the end of the year.
Okay, so when should we be booking for holidays?
Not yet. It's too
Really?
early.
It's too early.
Everyone is feeling trigger happy, but the sweet spot for booking your trips home for the holidays is actually from about September 14th to October 14th. So that 4-week window at the end of September and early October. Fares for trips home for the holidays, they start incredibly high in the summer. You'd be paying about 20% more than previous years if you booked right now. But if you wait, they're going to come down during that sweet spot. That's really when you want to book.
So you're saying if I've got a kid to bring back home overseas because of college overseas, I got to book that ticket pretty soon.
Yes, international fares for the holidays, you'll want to book between now and probably the end of September. So you've got a couple weeks,
Do it
maybe
now.
2 months.
You got to
but
tell her
start
now or else she won't do it.
If it's a nonstop ticket on a popular route and you see a good deal, definitely go for it.
You know what's funny though? The kids haven't even left yet for their trip.
Well, that's what I was saying. She's here right now.
Yeah.
What about hotels and I don't know, cruises? What are some of the other things that you're seeing when it comes to travel and costs?
Hotels are still pretty expensive. Prices are about 10-11% higher than this time last year, about $180 a night for a U.S. hotel. But something to keep in mind is travel behavior. We are definitely travelers now who are planning a little bit more last minute when it comes to flights. That's actually a good thing for hotel booking. Booking hotels at the last minute, as long as it's not a major resort that sells out early, can actually save you about 25% off of peak prices because most people plan ahead. If you're booking the last couple days before check-in, hotels drop prices. You can actually save a significant amount if you're a procrastinator.
I want to go back to the fuel costs and to what extent fuel costs have to do with high ticket prices. Do you know, Haley, what portion of an airline ticket is accounted for in fuel costs? Or I should say, what portion of a ticket, is made up of fuel costs?
It varies by airline depending on, their operational expenses in general, but also whether they're hedged. But traditionally, we've seen somewhere between 15 and 30% of operational expenses coming from fuel. It also differs by domestic and international. Those long haul routes are less efficient with fuel. But typically, if we see a 10% increase in jet fuel prices, for example, we might expect about 3% of that to be passed on to 3% of that 10% passed on to consumers.
Haley, just got 30 seconds. Any signs of recession in the data and what you are seeing and the trends that you are seeing?
We have been looking for it for maybe 18 months now, and I can say we still have not seen weakness in demand, in spending, in what we hear from our users on the Hopper app. On the whole, we're spending more than we have historically, we're taking more trips, and we're also seeing that in the data, what our bookers are actually doing. So seem to see strength in travel continuing.
I'm just going to say, we have to go, but I'm just going to get on a little rant here. The airports are too crowded.
They are.
They're gross.
Yeah.
Being on an airplane is no fun unless you're at the front of the plane. It's miserable, and yet we pay through the nose for it.
You are a crank, man.
It is like, when traveling with kids, the thing, it's like,
It is hard. It's very difficult.
You expect me to change a diaper here?
And then when you
Kids
baby
get
cry,
dirty.
the little one cries in there, everybody's like, hey.
I don't care.
I know you.
They're fine.
Haley Berg, lead economist over at Hopper. Thank you so much. This is Bloomberg.
Your company news headlines on Bloomberg Radio.
From Bloomberg World headquarters, I'm Charlie Pellet. Tapestry, the owner of brands that include Coach and Kate Spade, agreed to acquire Michael Kors' parent Capri Holdings in an $8.5 billion deal that shows the wave of consolidation in the luxury goods sector is far from finished. Today, Tapestry dropped 15.9%. Capri, though, surged 55.7%. Walt Disney shares advanced today after it said it will raise prices of its streaming services, including a 27% increase for the advertising-free version of the flagship Disney+. Shares of Walt Disney today up by 4.9%. But what does this price increase suggest about the broader picture for corporate pricing power? Margie Patel is Senior Portfolio Manager at Allspring Global Investments.
I think it's going to continue to be pretty strong. I think Disney's a great example, as they felt they had room to raise prices, and I think they'll be successful in retaining those price increases. And that's one of the reasons why we've seen corporate margins really maintain themselves. A lot of people thought this year we'd see margins really get squeezed, but companies have been able to pass on price increases.
And you can hear more of that conversation on the Bloomberg Surveillance podcast. You can download it wherever you get your podcasts. The cybersecurity company Checkpoint Software Technologies has signed a deal to acquire Perimeter 81 for $490 million in a cash-free, debt-free deal. Shares of Checkpoint today up 2.9%. And those are some of the top company stories at this hour. I'm Charlie Pellet, and this is Bloomberg.
You're listening to Bloomberg Business Week with Carol Messer and Tim Stenivek on Bloomberg Radio.
It is Bloomberg Business Week. I'm Tim Stenivek. That's Carol Masser. Let's get a check on the latest world and national news. For that, we go to Nancy Lyons in the Bloomberg 99.1 newsroom in Washington, D.C. Hey, Nance.
Thanks, Tim. President Biden has issued a disaster declaration for Hawaii following massive wildfires that have devastated the island of Maui and caused at least 36 deaths. Drought conditions and winds from a hurricane just hundreds of miles away have been fueling the flames. He also made a promise while speaking at an event this afternoon in Salt Lake City.
I just got off the phone before I got here for a long conversation with Governor Josh Green this morning. Let him know I'm going to make sure the state has everything it needs from the federal government to recover.
President Biden is looking for more money for the Defense Department and for Ukraine.
Sources tell Bloomberg the supplemental request would include about $12 billion for disaster relief and $13 billion for defense funds, including assistance for Ukraine. The emergency funds would not be subject to budget caps. The supplemental funding request sets up a possible showdown with Republicans who do not support more aid for Ukraine, as lawmakers prepare to hammer out a budget before the September deadline. In Washington, I'm Amy Morris, Bloomberg Radio.
The U.S. is striking a deal with Iran to release 5 Americans imprisoned in the country. National Security Council spokesman John Kirby says a delegation from Switzerland helped in the negotiations.
The Swiss representative did have an opportunity to meet with all of them once they got out of the prison, see them physically, talk to them, and that's how we know that they're out and that they're generally okay.
Kirby says the American detainees will eventually be allowed to leave Iran in exchange for several jailed Iranians and access to about $6 billion in Iranian assets blocked under U.S. sanctions. Medical experts say a new variant, along with record heat wave, are contributing to an uptick in COVID cases this summer. The virus is more easily transmitted indoors in air conditioning as people try to escape the heat. The EG5 variant has also helped lead to a 17% increase in COVID cases. Global news 24 hours a day, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in over 120 countries. I'm Nancy Lyons. Now back to you, Tim and Carol.
All right, Nance, thank you so much. Carol Master along with Tim Stenivek live here in our Interactive Broker Studio. Did you look outside the window?
No, is it raining?
It's just dark.
Well,
It's 4:57 in the afternoon.
Yeah, it shouldn't be dark this time of year.
No, it's kind of, here we go, the weather. Just saying. It's kind of rough.
It's just raining today.
I
Don't
know.
get too concerned.
Just raining today.
All right, so I want to talk a little bit about New York City.
Okay.
New York City's long-awaited rail tunnel. We heard a little bit about this already this afternoon. It's actually set to get shovels in the ground. This is good for you, Carol. This is good for you.
Have another way to come into New York City?
In a few years. Okay? $16.1 billion, long delayed. Once canceled, the effort to build a new tunnel linking New York and New Jersey will finally start appearing on Manhattan streets in the coming weeks.
Yeah, this is pretty wild, right? So we're talking Hudson Yards is where the work is beginning. So that's on Manhattan's west side. It's going to connect Penn Station with the Hudson Tunnel, the Gateway Project.
Okay.
Did you just say that?
No.
No.
No, I haven't said that.
I'm just curious about kind of where it's going to be on the Jersey side. Where is that tunnel coming out? Do we know that?
I don't know. I don't know where it's coming out.
Because there's a pretty, there's...
Do we care, though, Carol?
Well, I do. I mean, if it's not where I'm...
We're talking about New Jersey here.
Just
kidding. I'm just kidding.
Be very careful.
I'm just kidding. Okay, Gateway is key to easing congestion under the Hudson River.